So, Carrie, this is actually a huge honor to have you on the show because I don't think there is anyone I've binge watched more content in the last year than yourself. Ever since starting at MMU, I have binge watched so much of your content. I have watched it on holiday. I have watched it on planes. And I generally think as many, particularly for my audience, coaches should know about this so they can look after their clients' health. And I thought it'd be interesting today to go into all things menopause. But to start with, for people who don't know who Dr. Carrie Jones is, who are you and why are you dubbed the Queen of Hormones?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's a huge compliment. I want you to introduce me now to all podcasts moving forward. So thank you. And I have been a women's health and hormone doctor for about the last 24 years. I realized selfishly, I wasn't taught a lot about hormones. A lot of my patients weren't taught a lot about hormones. A lot of my friends didn't know about hormones. And so I thought I would get into it. So I did my residency in women's health, hormones, and endocrinology. I was in private practice for 15 years. I worked for a functional lab test called the Dutch test, which is a hormone test. So I just sort of stayed in this realm the whole time and have built up a lot of knowledge. And now, again, selfishly, perimenopause and menopause has become a huge area of focus for me because a lot of people, men and women, don't know about it. It was like this barren land of education. We all knew women had to go through it, but we didn't really know what it meant. Women were told to suck it up. You know, how do we handle somebody who's having hot flashes and night sweats, but yet preserve their brain? Hormones were dubbed the demon. And that is all, of course, making a big 180 change. So I am really happy to be here today to lend education and get people excited about all things hormones, but all things midlife, perimenopause and menopause.
I think the hormonal question is really, really interesting, right? We said on air that if we look at most of the health and fitness industry now, we have one side that is purely calories and one side that's purely hormones, and these things massively intersect. And we're also at the first time in certainly in the memory I have of the fitness industry where Google searches for health have surpassed Google searches for fat loss, body composition, and muscle gain. Yeah. So for people who are listening to this who are maybe more coaches working with the average population, focusing more on body composition and fat loss, where would you say the middle ground is between focusing on calories and focusing on the deeper aspects of hormonal and functional health?
Oh, I think there's a huge crossover. And I say this all the time because I know, especially as women go through perimenopause, especially as they start losing their progesterone and estrogen. And estrogen in particular has such a big role in our glucose, our lipids, our ATP production, like things that are really heavily involved in body composition. We know if she has the perfect macros, she's been working with a coach, and all of a sudden she hits 45 years old, or all of a sudden she hits 50 years old, she loses her period, estradiol goes down, she will call or email or text and immediately say, I'm gaining weight. I'm feeling a change. My pants are tighter. I'm getting more cellulite. I didn't change anything. I promise I'm following the macros. I promise I'm not cheating. And I hear this all the time because those change in hormones are literally affecting what she does with those macros or how she metabolizes fatty acids or what's going on in her liver, how her skeletal muscle is processing glucose or not. And so I think we have to pull the two of them together because, of course, if somebody's maybe excessive calories and we can give them all the estrogen they want and that's not going to work. And vice versa, if somebody is on the perfect macros, they're the ones that are going to call you and say, I didn't change anything. I promise I'm following the program. And yet everything is changing. I'm like, oh yeah, welcome to perimenopause.
The analogy I've always given it to my students is like, I use an American football analogy. I'm going to butcher this from someone that probably understands American football better than I do. But I always like having think of the manager or the coach being like the hypothalamus, right? He has to come up with a game plan. He will talk to the pituitary, which is like his quarterback, and he will throw balls to his halfbacks and wide receivers, which are your endocrine organs, endocrine glands. And while, yes, you need to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight, and we'll preface this with a overarching word of weight here rather than changing body composition, to lose weight and potentially be in a slight surplus to gain weight of whatever sort that is. If your coach is having a bombarded with the medium and he can't think about what he's doing, if the quarterback's arm is a little bit off, if all the halfbacks and wide receivers are running the wrong lines, you're going to lose to much poorer opposition than if you were firing on all cylinders. And this is why when I hear coaches talk about TDEE and they just go, that BMR is just coma calories. I'm like, that's like 60, 70% of your total energy expenditure. And we've got 15 to 20% as our liver. And we've got to think about our thyroid, and we've got to think about our sex hormones. And it's just this whole thing that is just brushed over as unimportant.
Right.
Because people haven't either, because like you said, like they've not been taught about them. They don't understand them, or they've told that that's all that matters.
Right.
And then their client hits their late 30s, everything changes, and they're all of a sudden like, what am I doing? Are they lying on the diet? Are they cheating? So like, what are some things that coaches need to know about the menopause that they're probably missing right now?
Well, first of all, it's not a disease, and all women are going to go through it, assuming they still have their ovaries. There's surgical menopause where maybe they've had a hysterectomy, everything's been removed, and that's immediately they've been shoved into menopause. But if she still has her ovaries, then somewhere between late 30s to early 50s, she's going to go through this big transition where first the hormone progesterone is going to go down, and then the hormone estrogen is going to go wild for a while, and then it too will go down. So it's a whole 6 to 10 year transition that happens. And in this transition, I often say we're just backing out of puberty. It's like reverse puberty. Everyone remembers what it was like to go through puberty. It was a lot of hormone up and down. It was a lot of changes in your skin and your how you looked, your height, your voice, your cravings, your everything, right? Everything changes in puberty. For women, they get their period. Now we're backing out of it. So once again, she's having all the changes. In fact, I've read and researched multiple times over, we have 12 systems in the body if we pull apart all the systems. And menopause can negatively impact all 12. In fact, I was just reading research yesterday about the low-grade inflammatory state the act of going through menopause puts most people, most women in. And that's independent of diet. That is independent of calories. That is independent of exercise. Just the act of going through the menopausal transition increases what's called the inflammasome. So the inflammatory cytokines, inflammation in the gut, inflammation in the brain, and having all this inflammation is only going to contribute to all these symptoms, including weight gain, right? She's going to start to develop more what we call an android or apple-shaped body. So she's going to call and say, it's not in the hips and the thighs and the booty. It's moving up. It's moving up. And now I'm getting a belly. I'm getting these rolls. I don't understand. I have a gut like I didn't used to. What could be going on? And so I want coaches to realize, well, one, I don't want to scare them. And then thinking like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, because there's an entire other side of menopause as well. That's really wonderful. But I do need everyone to know, like, our research is telling us she's going to be inflamed. We can get ahead of it, but she's going to be inflamed. Like I said, her cardiometabolic markers and function is going to be off, and it's going to impact all 12 systems. So if you can get ahead of that, if you can coach her on that, it's almost like when you're trying to get somebody pregnant, we do pre-fertility work, right? Preconception. Let's get you as healthy as possible to make a baby. Well, now we need to do perimenopausal work. Like, I need you as healthy as possible, but knowing when you go into this transition, you're going to move into an inflamed state, which is only going to cause all these downstream effects. So if you can go into it thinking this, it's way more than calories in, calories out. Obviously, that's important. But if you go into this thinking like, okay, I need to feed her for inflammation, however that looks. I need to train her against her inflammation. I need to keep her skeletal muscle really built up and adding to it instead of losing weight, but it's all the skeletal muscle she's losing, because it's only going to make things worse. And this information is now starting to come out more and more and more in our circles. It is not yet making mainstream medicine or mainstream media. And that's what I'm like, gosh, there's so much we can do from a diet and lifestyle supplement hormone point of view, in addition to the macros, the calories.
This is slightly off topic, but this is where I often see the rise of the evidence-based coach actually being sometimes can be a detriment to overall client health, because we are waiting for things to become mainstream consensus before they become things that we are going to talk about online. And we see coaches blindly following the research without really understanding sound principles. And there'll be people that have studied this for years, like yourself, that probably were getting ahead of this research. And now you're starting to see this research come out and going, this makes sense. And it's like using the example of the apple-shaped body. It's people will talk about spot reduction not being possible, where it is maybe not statistically significant for dramatic weight loss in a certain area, but I think we're having the wrong conversation. It is spot storage. Right. And I think we lose weight everywhere, but it's going to go back on to wherever it wants to go back on. And this, even just in a broader topic, just understanding this can have an impact on opening people's eyes to, okay, there's more to this than how much we move, how much we eat. So like, you mentioned getting ahead of this. And obviously there's a few things we might want to talk about pre going through this change to make sure people are healthy. And one of the biggest ones I can imagine for most people is the impact of yo-yo dieting. What impact does yo-yo dieting have? And how potentially could it impact someone going through this change in their late 30s, early 40s?
Well, I think everyone's probably either experienced it themselves or they have clients who have done a lot of yo-yo dieting. And it just gets worse every time. And it's almost like the first time they did it, they lost a lot of weight. And now the 10th time they're doing it, especially as they're getting close to 40 or in their 40s. And what's the first thing they say? Well, it's not working anymore. It used to work and it's not working anymore. And we know the damaging effects that yo-yo dieting can have, especially on women because of its impact on our hormones, because of its impact. As you mentioned earlier, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, down to the estrogen, which is the big player, but also our progesterone. And so when women have this really long history of yo-yo dieting, which is not uncommon, then it's going to impact how she goes through perimenopause because she's already going to be set up, I wouldn't say for failure, so to speak, but it's definitely going to be not set up very positively. You can almost predict in those clients, like, dang it, they're going to have a really rough ride if I don't intervene, help, educate, step in, just because of their whole history. And she's going to try to work her 40-year-old or 50-year-old body the same she tried to work it at 25 years old. And she is a whole new body at this point. It's a disservice to her to compare her 45-year-old self or her 55-year-old self to her 25-year-old self. But all women do it. They're like, I don't understand. I used to be able to just cut calories and get on the treadmill or the stepper machine, and I could easily lose 5 or 10 pounds if I needed to. And now, in fact, I gain weight. I feel puffy. I've gained, my pants are tighter when I try to do the same thing. I'm like, oh, you're in a whole different body right now. We can't do the same, but we have to do a lot of cleanup, knowing the amount of inflammation you probably have, mild or not, as you're going through this transition.
So for people that don't know, for the people who are maybe firmly in the calorie crowd, why is that? Why is it that someone could lose 10, 20 pounds in their first diet and they struggle to lose it, whether it's coming up to the menopause or not, but as they go through more and more of these dieting cycles?
I feel like the first time somebody goes through an extreme diet or any kind of yo-yo dieting, the body's like, oh, I've never seen this before. This is easy. Let's lose. And by the time decades have gone by and now they hit their 40s, the body's like, I'm not doing this. I can adjust to this. And oh, by the way, I've made changes already. The way we store fat as we get older, women get older into their 40s and 50s, when we have less estrogen, but more testosterone. Now, I don't mean elevated testosterone. I just mean relatively. Maybe your estrogens dropped down, but your testosterone stayed the same. So as a ratio, testosterone's winning. We develop more of an android shape. It activates the androgen receptors in our belly area and increases our risk for visceral fat. Well, visceral fat's really hard to lose when you've been yo-yo dieting for decades at this point. We know visceral fat's very inflammatory. It puts out all those inflammatory cytokines. We know is when we try to break apart the fat, maybe she's trying to do the crash dieting, she breaks apart the fat, she gets the fatty acids out, it goes into, I say, like the factories to use it, the Krebs cycle, right? And move on into oxphos to make ATP. It's not as efficient as it used to be. Estradiol is a big player for the Krebs cycle. Well, if you can't utilize it, then it's got to be stored somewhere. And it's often going to be stored in the apple shape and the visceral adipose, the fat around the organs. And so the act of yo-yo dying younger, we have youth and hormones on our side. Once we hit into our 40s and 50s, we don't have youth, and we often don't have the hormones. We don't have the efficiency in these, let's say, these factories that are helping us utilize the fatty acids and then eventually go on to make ATP. In fact, I was reading a study yesterday about the role estradiol plays in ATP. ATP being, of course, our battery packs, right? Our cellular energy, literal energy for the cells. And it's the difference between, are you running your body by candlelight or are you running your body by full spectrum light? And I guarantee you a lot of your clients are complaining of things and it sounds like candlelight. I don't have energy. I can't lose weight. I can't grow hair. My hair isn't falling out. My skin is looking older. My digestion, I have constipation, right? I don't have any patience. I'm depressed. And so these are candlelight type things, as opposed to full spectrum light is my energy is fantastic. I have all this lean muscle mass. I can easily grow hair. My skin looks great. My eyes are bright, right? Like full spectrum light. But we start to lose this. And if your coach is just saying it's a calories in, calories out, I'm sure you're cheating. Let's try this again. Let's cut more. That the body's like, it's a major stressor, and she's already stressed. So we have to be really careful with these women at this time.
And I suppose the important thing for a coach to understand is knowing what those symptoms are, right? It's you're going to have, if you have 10 clients, there's going to be, that aren't losing weight, there's going to be a bunch of them that have genuine things that we need to look a little bit deeper at, maybe look at labs, maybe look at some symptoms, maybe look at support and some stuff. And there's going to be half of them that are, they don't realize there's any calories in a latte and they're snacking on nuts because they're healthy.
Oh, absolutely. That's why you have to bridge the two together.
And it's knowing those symptoms and maybe able to look at things like food pictures and having a real good eye for how many calories in food, but also knowing, okay, this person has zero libido. This person is like crawling through their day. Yeah. So what, you obviously mentioned a bunch of them already, but what are some of the main symptoms that people need to look out for that their client might be starting going through this change, or even just in general when it comes to somebody's health, that we should be looking a little bit deeper here?
When we're talking, I actually did a poll on social media, but it aligns with research. I asked women, what were some of the first signs that for you that you noticed you were probably perimenopausal? And I'd say the biggest signs I learned were changes in their menstrual cycle. So it wasn't big changes. I would have women go, I changed by like 3 days or 4 days. And so they used to be a 28-day girl and now they're a 26-day girl or a 25-day girl or a 33-day girl. And again, not major change, but enough that they went, that's weird. Why am I changing by a couple days? The other second thing that I heard the most was insomnia. All of a sudden, I can't sleep. Carrie, I wake up at 3 a.m. I wake up at 4 a.m. I used to be a great sleeper, and now I can't sleep. Now, as other symptoms came through, it was like fatigue. All of a sudden, I feel fatigue. I feel that I don't have the energy that I used to. And then also mood. I don't have the patience that I used to. I'm feeling more anxious. I'm feeling quicker to snap or quicker to feel stressed out. I'm feeling more depressed or low mood. And then we get into the brain, like brain fog. I forgetting things, not as quick. Can't remember my neighbor's name, which is weird because they've been my neighbor forever. I go to do something on my computer and then I forget. So these are some of the, I'd say the most common in the early stages that women start to notice. Now, the kicker is you can chalk those symptoms up to anything, right? You can just go, well, of course, you have a full-time job and 2 kids and a household and you're married. Like, no wonder, like your stress is high, of course, or you travel a lot for your job. You know, you can blow a lot of these things off of, oh, I just haven't been taking care of myself. I've been burning the candle at both ends, not realizing, yes, and your hormones are also probably starting to shift. Now, libido is an interesting one that you mentioned because libido can kind of hit at any age. While we talk about it a lot in the perimenopausal, menopausal transition, I definitely have women in their 20s who tell me, like, I'm not interested. I don't want to. I have low libido. But it is not uncommon, let's say, as they go through this transition. Now, then we get into some of the physical stuff. Women will often report either my skin is breaking out again. Like they're like, it's like puberty. My skin's breaking out. This is weird. They will report I'm getting more wrinkles suddenly, or I'm feeling more, my skin is thinning. It's more crepey. And hair. I have a lot of women go, I used to have such thick hair. and now I have such thin hair. I'm losing hair when I didn't used to lose hair before, or hair texture is changing. I used to have straight hair. Now I'm getting wavy hair, or I used to have wavy hair and now it's getting more coarser. It's getting drier. And they're like, it must be my shampoo. It must be my water. It must be something I've eaten, because we've been trained in society to have a reason, make excuses. It must be my fault. I'm sure that's what it is. But nobody's training us yet that, hey, you're in your 40s and 50s or even late 30s. It could be the start of this transition, because these hormones play such a role in everything going on in your body. So I think it's important to check in as a coach, obviously, with asking these questions. And it's almost like, hey, do you think it could be perimenopause? Like, here's 10 questions and some, symptoms. You checked 8 of them. You're not sleeping. Your cycles are starting to change. You're noticing a lot of fatigue. Your anxiety's gone up. Do you think it could be perimenopause?
And so I'm assuming there the main thing is the accumulation of symptoms. Like, but as you said, if you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras. Yeah. There could be a lot of reasons why sleep is an issue or why energy is an issue. So, but what you also mentioned there is also common things for people that are super stressed out.
Yeah.
So if someone's HPA axis is going all over the place, we're going to get similar symptoms, whether this is actually linked to perimenopause or just linked to work, stress, family, etc., etc., etc. So I suppose there's a double-edged question to this. The first one is, have you seen changes in the severity of menopause symptoms and how people are going through this as we've now moved into more of a world where more women are becoming super successful, busy entrepreneurs and have schedules like yours and all that sort of thing? Have you noticed that coincide with issues with the gut, issues with inflammation, issues with the menopause? I suppose that's the first thing. And then secondly, how does a coach kind of go, well, it could just be stress. It could be this. Is this where we start looking at labs to find out?
So to answer your first question, the answer to your first question is, I definitely find when women go into perimenopause with those foundations nailed down, the foundation, the diet, the lifestyle, the community, their exercise, their sleep, all, those foundational things, they tend to do better. It doesn't mean they get through scot-free. It doesn't mean they have no symptoms, but just anecdotally talking to hundreds and hundreds of women, attending a lot of conferences, a lot of social media, they're like, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. It doesn't mean they don't need hormones potentially, but I do have women say to me, like, thank God I do all the things. Thank God I started in my 30s and now it's not so bad as I'm going through perimenopause. Now, it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee, but I do notice it, at least as an observer of a lot of women in a lot of places. Now to answer your, so then we get into, could it be stress? So the answer is yes. So if a coach is like, well, could it be stress or perimenopause? We'll treat both. Like, if you know they're stressed out, if you know their HPA axis is a mess, if you know they're living on adrenaline, I'm not saying blame perimenopause, but acknowledge, hey, it's women in this transition because their hormones aren't anchored anymore, is being consistent, then they're going to be more susceptible to stress. They're going to be less resilient temporarily while they're going through this big transition. So if you know that, then work with them on their stress response, their resiliency, their HPA axis. Now, as far as testing, when you're getting these symptoms back, I am a fan of testing. I think knowing what we know, that a lot of women develop thyroid issues at this transition, check their thyroid. If you are listening to their cortisol story, their stress story, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, and you're thinking, I should probably check and see what their cortisol is doing. Is it high? Is it low? Is it high at night? Is that why they can't sleep? Yeah, go ahead and test it. Since we know their lipids, their metabolic markers, their glucose, their insulin, is not great in this transition. It gets progressively worse unless you intervene. And if she's coming to you saying, I'm gaining weight and I haven't changed anything, run the markers. Let's see where she's at. So yes, let's be proactive as she's making this transition and not 100% just rely on, again, calories in, calories out. They're important. And we have to look at the whole person, right? It's a 360 approach. We're working with women going through perimenopause.
And I suppose, like, when it comes to said of treating both, it becomes this chicken and the egg thing. Maybe the stress isn't the cause. Maybe it is the perimenopause symptoms. But if you said if someone's less resilient temporarily through stress this period, they've already got a pretty full stress cup. So either you helping empty some of that stress cup a little bit is either going to help them bring back down the less resilient state they're in, or it's the problem and you're working on the direct root cause of this.
Yeah.
So if someone's going through this or someone's client's going through this, if we start there in terms of stress management stuff, what have you found to be the most helpful, whether it is lifestyle stuff or supplementation or training related? What have you noticed seem to work?
Yes. Two things I would say stand out the most. The first thing is get them sleeping, which is a tough thing because that's probably a number 1 or number 2 symptom they're having. So anything you can do to get them sleeping, whether that's their sleep hygiene at night, get them off their screens, have them get a wind down routine. That's not wine with an E, that's wind with a D. Or, calming herbs, sleepy time tea, whatever you're doing at night to get them to sleep. If they need progesterone, referring them to get on progesterone at night because it's very calming. Sleep is huge. It's where we rest, we repair, our brain goes through detoxification. Now, the second thing is very easy. It's empowering them to have boundaries and say no. Because what I find a lot is that as women are going through this transition, they, again, think they can take on the world and they can do everything for everybody, not realizing their own self, their own body is getting more threadbare. They're not as resilient as they used to be. We want to be as women. We have been for decades. But again, now we're burning the candle at both ends. So really empowering her to say, you know what, it's okay to say no, set boundaries, and no is a complete sentence. And the amount of women that I've said this, like, don't do something that doesn't light you up. Don't do something if you're not like absolutely required to do it. Say no. Make space in your life. Give yourself more breathing room. Has been massively helpful for a lot of women. Now, I love all the stress stuff. I love the breathwork exercises. I love stretching. I love yoga. I love having more easy days as opposed to hard training days. I love all the supplements, but all the supplements in the world are not going to help set boundaries. If she's constantly adding to her plate, she's taking care of everybody else, she's neglecting her own health, like ashwagandha is not going to fix that. Rhodiola is not going to fix that. So we start with what can we do that's, effective, free, cheap, and easy. Let's get her sleeping. Let's get her setting boundaries. And then let's back up from there. What else can you add to your plate of going through this transition? I hear it from a lot of type A overachieving women. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have time to journal and do 30 minutes of meditation and then 10 minutes of breath work and then get all the protein in and then lift heavy and then add sprints and then like it's a full-time job almost just going through perimenopause. I'm like, oh yeah, no, let's cut that way back and say no.
I think that's one of the biggest things with stress management as a whole,
yes.
right? We've certainly seen this big push of sort of like biohacking and recovery, which I love. I'm a huge fan of this. But then we have people getting up, going out into the sunlight in the morning, touching grass, come back in, doing a 3-hour journal. Then they're doing a 12-hour meditation. Then they're getting in an ice bath.
Yeah.
And like your day's taken up. And it's such a, one is an individual component, but two, there's just take stuff away before you add stuff. And for one person, yes, a high nervous system demanding workout on paper, looking at the principles shouldn't be a good idea. But if someone has a really stressful day and lifting a few heavy sets of deadlifts actually calms their mind to relax into the evening, there's like, yes, there is what's said in research, and then there is the human in front of you, and there's being able to work with that person, I suppose.
Right. And I love that you said the cold plunge. I will have women say to me, I'm thinking about buying a sauna, like a big, beautiful cedar red, I'm thinking about buying a cold plunge. Do you think I should buy that? And I'm like, no, because you're still having your glass of wine at night as you scroll mindlessly on your phone and you're not sleeping and you won't say no to anything and you're taking care of everybody. Jumping in an ice bath is not going to help you. What I need you to do actually is swap out your wine for sleepy time tea at night. I need you to start saying no. I need you to build in time for yourself. It's some of these, again, I'm just going to say foundational basics, but because it's never been taught, it's not considered acceptable and everybody around you is doing it. So you're like, well, it must be normal. Then it's hard to think like, oh, I need to, as you said, I need to back off. I don't need to add more. I'm like, Yeah. And it's okay. Sometimes as a coach, and I tell my coaches this, sometimes you're just trying to keep her head above water. Don't add in all the extra stuff because she's literally drowning right now in her stage of her life. Just keep her head above water and work on her nervous system, and a lot gets better.
And some of that is very much in the control of the coach, changing training stimulus. That adds nothing to their plate. Like, I had a coach, this wasn't anything to do with the menopause, this was a male client, but was struggling with sleep, struggling with energy, and nutrition was in a good place, hydration was in a good place. He wasn't in a crazy big deficit. I was like, have you tried changing training stimulus? He's a big ego lifter. Let's just pull volume down for a little bit, work on some pump work. You'll probably feel good with it. Right. And these are things that are in the coach's control you can make an impact on that stress cup without having to ask anything of them. And while there's probably more impactful things you can do, if someone is a Fortune 500 company owner, or they have a family of 8 and they're just terrible at saying no because they always have taught to put themselves last, that might take time. What are the things that we can do immediately? And this is why I always talk about, you can empty the cup, which is probably relatively quick to do. You could get a bigger cup, which is therapy, journaling. That takes time, unless you've got an ayahuasca in a jungle on your doorstep. Or you can put a lid on the cup, which isn't as effective, but it's that's the supplementational support. Right. It's putting a plaster on the bullet wound. It's not taking out the shooter, but at least you're not bleeding out in the process, So we've gone over the stress component here. What if you had a tick list of other things women need to be aware of to be able to set themselves up for this time? What are some of the top considerations in your mind?
The GI tract health is another big one. And I think we're going to see this really hit the research pretty consistently over the next year. I think we're going to see it a lot on social media, because as women go through perimenopause, their hormone changes negatively the diversity in their microbiome in their GI tract. And that's the microbiome from the mouth all the way down. My dentists that I talk to say, we can definitely tell as women are going through menopause where they're at because of their gum health or the health of the teeth, even TMJ, the temporal mandibular
I remember
joint.
You saying TMJ recently. I thought that was very interesting.
First I read about progesterone and TMJ, and I had a dentist tell me we see that all the time. Women, when they lose their progesterone, their TMJ gets worse. Then I read an article about estrogen, and its role in TMJ. I'm like, we can't win. What the heck? It's so not fair. So from the mouth all the way down. So when these hormones change, estrogen and progesterone play a big role in how our tight junctions, right? Our gates in our large intestines allow things to go through. And we can get leaky gut, or more prone to leaky gut, because of the change in estrogen and progesterone. We have a mucus layer, like a snotty layer that's there to trap all the yucky stuff so that our immune system can come deal with it. And we actually have parts of our microbiome, like Akkermansia. Its job is to make sure the mucus layer is healthy. But estrogen is a big proponent of Akkermansia. It's a big trigger for Akkermansia. And when she doesn't have a lot of estrogen, then she can lose out on that diversity. And this is just one example of Akkermansia. So what happens now is she's developed leaky gut, and she gets what's called translocation. So things that should stay in the intestine are crossing through out into the rest of her body, and her immune system gets mad. And when the immune system gets mad, it creates inflammation. So it further contributes to this low-grade inflammatory state that she's in. And what's amazing is that we can do so much with the GI tract. Now, I mentioned our diversity goes down. So this means add in diversity of food. I guarantee you a lot of coaches, when they create their meal plans, people are eating the same thing every day. When you go out to a restaurant, your favorite Mexican, your favorite Thai, your favorite Indian, you eat the same thing because it's your favorite, it's good, and you know it. When you get takeaway, you order the same thing. Time for some diversity, right? So time for some diversity. Adding in extra fiber, but changing up the fiber. What about things like jicama? What about things like artichoke? Like things that people don't normally eat, throw it in there every once in a while. Get some diversity. Eat the rainbow. Try a vegetable you haven't had in a long time. Rotate it through as it comes through the seasons. Then we get into things like resistant starches, which again can be very food-based. I'm not asking anybody to do crazy supplements if it doesn't fit in their budget. We can do a lot with diet. But then if we do want to add in some supplements, now the research is focused on what's called a short chain fatty acid. And these are what we call postbiotics. So it's basically like what the microbiome essentially poops out, and it feeds the large intestine cells, the colonocytes, for their health. And a big one that's hitting the research, and it has for a while, but it's coming a lot more around menopause, is called butyrate. And as women go through menopause, our butyrate producers go down. So adding in, even as a supplement, adding in more butyrate, or this is why you're hearing more about the resistant starches, because they can be helpful, supporting akkermansia, because that can be helpful. Akkermansia is actually helpful for a different one called propionate, but it's still in that the short chain fatty acid family. And so by understanding, we've learned so much about the microbiome. There's a lot to learn, but I feel like a lot of coaches, especially in the functional world, have gotten gastrointestinal, GI, microbiome education to some degree. So no matter the age, we know we can support it a lot, but coming into menopause, like, oh my goodness, we need to support it right from the get-go. It needs to be absolutely part of the plan to reduce that leaky gut part, and then to reduce the inflammation that's driving up all of her other symptoms.
That's really interesting. I always talk about the Seeger, the sort of mucus part, like a bouncer on a nightclub door. He lets certain things in and he won't let other things in. And if you don't pay that guy, he will get burnt out. He won't do his job. He'll fall asleep on the job, and then things will all of a sudden get through and attack our immune system. You mentioned food rotation. Food rotation is a really interesting one, because I'm like most things in health, right? There was a little bit of a Goldilocks just right level of food rotation, because when clients come in the door, they actually probably don't have as much rotation in their food as they think, right? But they often think they need more rotation in their diets because they have this preconception that diet equals boring. I need 7 million recipes.
Right.
So we almost want to get people into structure. And when we look at people having the research of long-term weight loss, some of the common things are people weigh themselves more frequently, so they're more accountable. People getting a little bit of a buy-in, maybe initial quick win. And people eating roughly the same things every day, because it becomes autopilot, removes decision fatigue. Yet we also know the benefits, especially from a gut health perspective, as you mentioned, of rotating foods. So for people listening, it's like, how often should people considering rotating foods so it doesn't become so overwhelmingly complicated, but at the same time get what we need to from a digestive perspective?
So I don't want to make this complicated. Like technically, for example, like my coach, when I work with my coach, we rotate styles of eating about every 3 to 4 days. So we rotate, high carb, low carb, keto, sort of every 3 to 4 days, because I'm trying to achieve a certain thing. Yeah. But what I am also, if that's, some people are like, no, that's too hard. What should I do? I'm like, just choose differently. Like if you're going to have a vegetable and you always eat broccoli, that's what you eat on Mondays with your chicken. Okay, can we do turkey instead? And can we do cauliflower instead? Or can we do, parsnips instead? Can we do other vegetables that maybe you don't normally add in? If you only eat bananas, that's the only fruit you eat. Like, can we throw in some berries sometimes? Like just even starting really basic for somebody, because again, it depends on their level of commitment and their level of overwhelm. That I'm like, let's just try new things. Carrots and peas are not the only vegetables out there. Let's diversify, or let's eat with the season. So at the time of recording, now it's the fall, like a lot of the squash are coming out, and can we start adding those in? And then when we move into spring, can we try the spring vegetables and the spring fruits, and through the summer, etc. You can keep, a lot of what you eat, but try new things, rotate in new things. But if you're more advanced, if you're like, no, that sounds really interesting, rotate the style I'm eating every 3 or 4 days, then that's more nuanced, right? So now you're like, okay, you're shifting your macros to be either like high carb day for a few days, low carb day for a few days, or full on keto for a few days, and just sort of rotating around can make a huge difference. And it doesn't have to be long. You may do it for a month or 2 or 3. Can make a huge difference in what's going on in your GI tract. And you will read this, and once you get in the literature, you will read over and over microbial diversity, food diversity. Diversity comes up over and over and over again. But because the scientists don't define diversity, nobody's really sure, like, what does that mean when it comes to diet? Like food diversity. I was just reading a study yesterday about food diversity, and they kept saying it, but they never defined what they meant by food diversity. They just said people eat the same thing over and over. And I'm like, well, then that's easy. We can switch that up and let's see what happens.
I love that you mentioned keto dieting, because I certainly in my echo chamber of the fitness industry that I see that we're quick to demonize things these days in the world where Instagram is very much the stitch incoming era, where we like to criticize everybody else. That the people are very anti-keto or very anti-carnivore, very anti these tools. And why I look at it, they are a tool, and there are benefits to someone wanting a keto diet, whether that is a physiological benefit or whether that is just it's easier to swap chips for a side salad than it is to try and get someone to remove the oil they're cooking in at a restaurant. So low carb is easier for some people who are busy than a high carb, low fat diet. So from in this perspective, you mentioned keto. What are the benefits of a ketogenic period in that rotation in your mind?
Oh, yeah. Well, because we have obviously with the ketogenic diet, we're going for the fat aspect, right? So we're just, as part of this rotation, again, is diversity. So what you would eat in a high carb day is completely different than you would eat in a ketogenic couple of days, which is all about the diversity. Two totally different meal plans. Even if you didn't do the ketogenic, let's say you did carnivore, which is sometimes often very close. So again, what you would eat in a carnivore day, very, very different than what you would eat in a high carb day. And that's the point. You're trying to, shock isn't the right word, but you're trying to like show the microbiome differences. I want it to move. I want it, your microbiome can change very quickly. I'm not saying it will stay that way, but I'm trying to shift out maybe bad bugs. I'm trying to show diversity, especially when she's losing diversity as she's going through menopause. And again, I fully see it when people are like, oh, carnivore is bad, keto is bad. And I'm like, I'm just advocating for a couple days. I'm just advocating for some change because the research is showing us food diversity can make a huge impact on the microbiome and what's going on down there. So let's do it. It's easier than we think. And people are already buying food. I just need them to buy a different food. It's not like adding in a supplement.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I really want to change the ethos, the way we look at macronutrient ratios. Often when we think of low carb, we think of carbs being bad, and that's the conversation, or low fat and fats being bad. And I think, no, I think this is completely the opposite. For the most part, we are setting protein that probably might change a little bit, but not as much as the other two macronutrients. I consider a low carb diet not carbs being fat bad, but fats being good. What are the benefits? What are the good things about fats? In the flip side, what are the good things about carbohydrates? You've mentioned inflammation already, right? Loading up on maybe more omega-3 and anti-inflammatory fats can help with this inflammatory piece of the puzzle. It just means we don't have as much room for carbohydrates within our calorie allotment. Then on the flip side, we've mentioned stress management. We've mentioned thyroid during the menopause. And what is carbs going to do? Help calm the nervous system, help support thyroid. So that rotation makes sense from a huge array of perspectives here.
And women, because since that's what we're talking about, women can usually get on board with that, because I'm not asking you to go carnivore forever. I'm not asking you to be high carb forever, although probably argue some people would like to do that. What I am asking is just to start rotating. And the great thing is, because it's customizable, people might say, well, my kids are in, all sorts of sports and my weekends are busy. I'm like, great, make your Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever you want. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to switch. Let's do keto or carnivore Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we'll switch out. And then people will say, well, what about with their menstrual cycle? I'm like, absolutely. We can totally tailor this to her being in her second part of her cycle, her luteal phase. We can do the higher carb there. We can do the lower carb in the follicular phase. Like, we can absolutely adapt it to her and see how it works. But women tend to like it because it's not, this is what you're doing and you're going to do it for months, because then they do get that fatigue. They're like, oh, I just want a piece of bread, but I can't have it. But in these rotations, it's like, well, just not for 3 days, or depending on your cycle. Because remember, women in perimenopause can still absolutely have regular cycles for a long while. And we still have to keep in mind that aspect of it, where they're in the follicular phase, it's the building phase. And in the luteal phase, it's the potential, whether she wants to or not, the potential she may become pregnant to implantation. So her whole brain and her whole body is sort of working around that, which is why our type of exercise and in what we eat, and that second half can set her up for success or failure if it's very restrictive.
I love the evolution of that. I think this is when you often hear people talk about diet and training around the cycle. They often see things where it gets so complicated from day one, right? Brand new woman comes into you, she doesn't know what a macronutrient is, and you've given her 4 different diet plans for 4 different weeks and 4 different training routines depending on where her strength is perfect in the cycle. I'm like, she doesn't even know what a protein is. And I think what I like about that approach, you could start going, okay, there's some gut issues here, there's some inflammatory issues here. Let's start low carb. You get nailed good at that. And then you start to build up carbs maybe on training days. And then you kind of go, oh, I'm really struggling in my luteal phase. Okay, let's do some carbs in there. Yeah. And you almost build the diet and the foundation around them. And then as you learn the individuals, start to tweak when and where you place these things around their personal life or how they're feeling, as opposed to overcomplicating when some people barely even feel their cycle. They don't even notice it. Don't make it more complicated. Other are flawed.
Yeah. Don't you think that's the knack of a good coach? And I think coaches can learn, or any practitioner, any healthcare practitioner, we can go get certificate after certificate after certificate. We can go to school. We can go to conference. Most coaches have a lot of really great information. They're very well educated after a while. But what we need then is that aspect of it. How do you read and understand the client who comes to you to know where they're at, how not to overwhelm them, and create a plan for that? Because if you have somebody, just as you said, they don't even really know what a protein is, they're not quite sure, like, you would never give them a 4-part plan to go with their menstrual cycle. She may not even track her menstrual cycle. Her period just shows up randomly and she's like, cool, I'm not pregnant. So you have to work with that. And then you will have the complete other side of that very type A who's been reading the books and on social media, and she's coming to you for a plan around her menstrual cycle because she's been reading about it. And how to navigate in between is really the nuance of a good coach versus just, oh, I learned this about cycling, I'm going to apply it to everyone.
Yes.
We got to meet the person where they're at, which is why I often mention things like what's free, cheap, and easy. How does it fit in their budget? What level are they at of commitment? Do they even have buy-in? Because a lot of that, everything I'm saying isn't going to work if they don't have any of that buy-in, if you can't meet them where they're at.
Yes, I completely agree. One of the things I was taught when I was doing the sales training at Ultimate Performance was, one of the early questions you ask is, did you come from far? And it's such an interesting question. And the aim was to ask for small talk. It's just to get people coming to the gym. They're scared. They're nervous. They're meeting this person that's in shape. They maybe feel insecure. And it just means you're not going into, tell me why you're not happy. You start with something easy. But when I unpacked it, I thought, this is such a beautiful question, because you can then follow this up. Have you come from far? Oh, no, just round the corner. Oh, do you work or live round the corner? Oh, I work round the corner. Oh, where do you work? Oh, the investment bank down the road. Right. Okay. I know meal prep companies. I know supplementation. These aren't going to be overwhelming conversations to this person. If you go, hey, have you come from far? Oh, yeah, I've traveled 2.5 hours. Well, I know they're committed.
Yeah.
And then I kind of go, okay, why this gym? Why have you not moved closer to the city? Oh, I can't afford it. Rent prices are sky high. I now know if I start going, let me tell you about magnesium threonate, like they're going to pull back. Yeah. And it's that ability to ask the right question that sort of really impacts where you navigate, like a choose your own adventure novel in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So going like off the back of that in a way, actually, one more thing I want to ask you about digestive issues and food rotation. Yeah. What about fermented foods?
So yes, with the caveat, because some people already know, oh my gosh, when I eat fermented foods, I blow up. I'm very bloated. I'm very gassy. I feel worse. So, they have some digestive things to work on. And other people do fermented foods and they don't have, maybe you ask them, do you have yogurt? And how are you doing? Do you have kimchi? Do you have sauerkraut? And they may say yes, and I don't notice anything. And you're like, perfect. We can add that into the rotation. A lot of people don't do a lot of fermented foods. It's depending on your culture. It's not often a part of what they're rotating. So I am personally a big fan of it, but I do double check, like, hey, when you eat some of these foods, one, do you ever? And two, how do you feel? And then I go from there. Because if they're immediately like, oh my gosh, never, no, it blows me up. I'm like, oh, we have some gut work to do. But if they're like, I guess, I mean, like, yeah, I like kimchi when I have Korean. I'm like, cool. Let's start rotating this through.
Okay, interesting. And then when it comes to nutrient deficiencies, you obviously mentioned thyroid being potentially going down during this period. Are you looking at other things like B vitamins, iodine? Are you adding things like Brazil nuts into people's diets? Like,
Yep.
what are you looking at from a nutrient deficiency perspective as people go through this?
Magnesium is a big one, since you just mentioned magnesium 3 and 8. Magnesium activates ATP, and we know a lot of people are just, unfortunately, because of soils, because of our foods, because of digestion, because of exercise, sweating, they just don't get as much magnesium that they need. And magnesium is a big one that I think, especially perimenopause, menopause, making this transition, is only going to help them. B12, we have two active forms of B12 in our body. We have adenylyl B12 and we have methyl B12. There are other forms for supplementation, hydroxo and cyanocobalamin, but the adenylyl and the methyl are big. Now, methylcobalamin helps our methylation cycle. Adenylcobalamin, or B12, helps our Krebs cycle. And so I test B12 and I may add in one or both of these B12s and see what's going on in the body. Vitamin D. D is a big one, especially if you live in an area like I do, like you do, that doesn't get a lot of sun. And remember, when you're doing vitamin D can suppress vitamin E, but you need also magnesium and K2 for vitamin D to be active. So you can see now, you're like, oh my gosh, this seems really complicated. This is why diet rotation is so important. This is why absorption from the digestive tract is so important. Can we get these nutrients in, or do we actually need to supplement? Now, as far as iodine, I don't generally test iodine, to be honest. I follow the work of Dr. Brownstein in Michigan, and who is not the biggest fan of testing for a lot of reasons. But I can absolutely, if I'm working with thyroid, for sure, can often add in iodine is part of the protocol that I'm doing.
You mentioned soils and things like that earlier on. I think this is another really interesting topic here when it comes to like toxic load. I know this is something you spoke about in general, but I think it's a really interesting topic because it's one that, again, we see two camps. We see the people that think everything is going to kill you and they're in a supermarket with their shirt off telling you everything's toxic. And we have the other group of people saying your liver's pretty resilient, you don't need to worry about it. And both of those camps are really wrong. We see people being overwhelmed by they have to change everything. They can never look at a plastic water bottle again, and that causes more issues to the HbA than it ever will to the liver having that thing. So where do you stand on toxins? What's important? What do we need to know? What are some of the easy wins that people can do? And is this become more important as we get older and less resilient to stress?
I think so. Yeah. And in fact, there's some cool or scary research coming out talking about the forever chemicals, the PFAS. So the forever chemicals are in like your waterproof stuff. It's in pots and pans. It's in your flame retardant, like the clothing for children, or your sofa, your couch. But these forever chemicals are now being linked to earlier menopause, potentially, and worsening menopause. You know, some of these chemicals have already been linked to other conditions, PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. But now we're starting to see it like, how is it screwing up this whole transition as women get older? Or what is it doing to their ovaries and their follicles? Again, they've already looked at fertility. They've already looked at PCOS. So now we're just moving up in the age group. And so what I tell people, I gauge toxins based on, again, it's the knack of being a good coach. If they're ready for it, we have the toxin talk. Like, what can we swap out or get rid of? If they're a candle burner and they come in, you know, they're wearing a perfume, they're big into scents, their laundry detergent is scented, we start to have the conversation of like, I don't need you to break the bank, but I do need you to start switching out. Let's go for some cleaner, greener stuff as you run out of it. When you run out of your skincare, what could we consider swapping it to? You're going to buy it anyway. Let's try to find something that's maybe a little healthier. Your home, you live a lot of time in your home. People who work from home, I'm like, are you doing a lot of candles? You know, what's your air quality like? Again, we're just sort of slowly moving through this because I don't want to overwhelm them and I don't want to scare them. Our toxin load will never be zero, and we're human. We do the best we can. But I definitely know that it contributes. And I've had so many women anecdotally just report, you know, these are the key things I gave up, and wow, I can tell a difference, or my skin looks better, or my asthma got better, you know, just things they never put together. Their hormones, their PMS got better. I'm like, yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have. I don't scare them. I meet them where they're at, but we do have the conversation around toxins.
I think it's just being aware that it's important, right? Like for sake of argument, like I'm living in this flat at the moment and there is a mold issue in this flat and it's gotten worse, particularly in the bedroom, which is weird because it has the least moisture. And that's something like, okay, I could just completely ignore that and go, God, why have I got a sore throat or tickly throat? Me knowing that, which means I will either fix it or move. And it is something that, okay, at least I know that the health implications are that. Not to scare me, but it's just so I'm not letting things go over my head and then wondering why my health has been affected for it. And in that same way, it's like the reason why I don't think enough people take toxins seriously is because it's very, very difficult to test. I could test X toxin has this impact on health or not, but it's very rarely one. It's the accumulation of several. And if you try to test what the impact of several toxins had on you, that would be a bad study because you're not controlling all the variables. So it's kind of things like, okay, we're never going to get research to back this up, but we've got enough anecdotal stuff to go, okay, it's maybe worth paying attention to it. But if we scare people, we're causing more issues with stress than the toxins would have ever done in the first place.
Right. That's why I ease into it. I ease into it depending on the person that I'm talking to. Now, you can have people the other way. I absolutely have had patients who are so freaked out by all the toxins that it is stressful to them. They're struggling to live their life. And so then you're trying to reverse coach them in not to, but more, I mean, again, I'm like, how do I word this? You're reverse coaching them in, like, it's okay to relax. You know, you're doing a really good job. You don't have to avoid all plastic everywhere in your life. You can't. You absolutely, like, we're just trying to do the best we can to support our body. And in the meantime, I'm trying to support the liver, the kidneys, the intestine. Like, I'm trying to support the things that, like, hopefully can get rid of these chemicals at the same time. So I do have the extremist patients who were like, I've read all the books, I follow the social media, you know, I only, you know, use glass, and I refuse to drink out of plastic, and I won't wear any makeup anymore. And they just have gone so far down that they're just so stressed out. I'm like, ooh, okay, now you're not living your life. And, you know, now you're so afraid that if you touch or stare at a plastic water bottle, you're going to die. And that's not the case. Like, let's back you off the other way.
What could people, you mentioned being resilient to it and looking at working through the liver and the kidneys, things like this. What are some things that people can do to make them more resilient to the toxins in their environment?
Well, a big toxin that people forget about that takes up a lot of space in the liver is alcohol. And I laugh because people, it's because it's legal and because it's super accepted, then they're like, no, my glass of wine, you know, my pint, that's not affecting me. I'm like, well, it has to get broken down by the liver, and it's a whole process, and it uses a lot of resources. So if you are having a glass of wine or a pint every night and you're having all these hormone symptoms, hey, look, let's do a trial of no wine or no pint or no whatever you're doing for a bit and see what's going on. Now, the liver does use a lot of resources. I know on social media, there are experts who say you don't need to support the liver because it's a perfect filter, and, you know, it does its job. And it is a perfect filter. You're born, hopefully, in theory, with a perfect filter, just like your car filter, the filter for the heat in your house. However, over time, it uses a lot of vitamins, nutrients to make it do its job. It uses a ton of B vitamins, zinc, magnesium. If you are deficient in any of those, iron, to get through phase 1 detoxification, they're all iron dependent, heme dependent. So if you're anemic, it's going to affect the way you detox through your liver. And so just being able, like, people are like, well, how do I support my liver? I'm like, well, let's evaluate your alcohol. Let's start to evaluate some of these toxins, and then let's make sure you're absorbing the foods you're eating and just getting the basics. B vitamins, are you anemic? Zinc, magnesium, you know, just some of these nutrients we should be absorbing from our food, because that's honestly what helps the liver go round.
One of the biggest symptoms that I've seen with clients of coaches that I work with is mood, and managing mood through this period of time. Like, how does the menopause affect people's mood, and what can we do?
Huge. I just read a study yesterday, actually the National Institutes of Health, I think it was ours, the NIH, not yours, but I think the NIH said that 50 to 74% of women going through this transition struggle with mood, whether it's anxiety, overwhelm, depression, panic, etc. So it's a huge amount. And a lot of it is the downshift in hormones. So the downshift in estradiol, the downshift in progesterone, because of the role they play in our neurotransmitters in our brain, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, so they can help us feel calm or happy or, relaxed or, less depressed, etc. And then those play a role in other hormones such as oxytocin. Oxytocin is our love hormone, our bonding hormone. Do we feel like we want to go hang out with our friends, be with our family, or do we feel more withdrawn? We don't want to, we're more introverted, which can then perpetuate more mood issues, of course. So yes, a big percent of women as they're making this transition can struggle with all the mood stuff I just said due to those hormones. Now, there are lifestyle, diet, foundation, sleep play a role in mood. Obviously, if you haven't been sleeping for a while, your mood is probably not that great. If you're really stressed out, you probably don't have a lot of patience. Maybe your anxiety's high. And if we can get that support for those hormones, estrogen, progesterone, that can make a world of difference in how people's, not only their brain functions, but their mood as well.
Going you obviously mentioned getting that support, and I want to go into a little bit about HRT in terms of where should people get started with this. But actually, I want to almost skip a step and come back here just on that topic of mood, because often people will get support and they'll be looking at mainly at estrogen and progesterone. And often it's very ignored of adding in testosterone into a HRT cycle. And I've seen this be the reason why people's mood has hit the absolute floor. Because this is not going to be the thing that's mentioned, when should we consider testosterone in a HRT cycle? And what's the conversation people should be having with their doctor to even look at this?
Well, what's interesting is testosterone, at least here in the US, it is not FDA approved for mood, right? It is not FDA approved. Actually, for a lot of things, it's used off label when used with perimenopausal or menopausal women. But I love testosterone. When I recommend testosterone, I will be honest, I usually start with progesterone and estrogen first, or we'll do progesterone first and then estrogen, because most women lose estrogen before they lose testosterone. And what I've seen sometimes is if they get on testosterone without supporting the other hormones, they may notice their mood is better, but they can tend to notice that their metabolic symptoms get worse or their weight gain gets worse. So again,
if aromatization.
It's because of the testosterone imbalance between estrogen at the receptors. Okay. So in the midsection, women have a lot more androgen receptors. And then in our hips, our thighs, our butt, we have a lot more estrogen receptors. So when estrogen drops down and then we're just giving them all sorts of testosterone, it's reinforcing the androgen receptors and could potentially push. So for example, like a PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, android type body, they develop usually insulin resistance, high glucose, and notice their weight gain is around the middle. And women going through this transition, if they go on testosterone too much or too soon, they may notice that as well. It's activating sort of that aspect of the metabolic. Now, not all women, but some women. So this is why I do appreciate testing, because I want, and what's going on with their body shape and their metabolic health before I just start with testosterone is the very first thing. They may need the progesterone estrogen part first for a while, and then I add in the testosterone. So I'm not opposed to testosterone. I'm just strategic in how I do it.
And you mentioned, do you add progesterone and estrogen at the same time, or are you starting progesterone first? If so, why?
So oftentimes women will want progesterone first because they will still be getting their period. They'll be in their maybe late 30s, early 40s, having symptoms, but their symptoms are very progesterone. They're not calm. They can't sleep. Their periods are getting heavier. Their PMS is worse. Very progesterone type symptoms. So I'm like, let's start with progesterone. Then as they move through and start losing their cycles, they get more low estrogen symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats, dryness, joint pain, muscle pain. Then I'm like, okay, now it's to do estrogen. Now, again, this is assuming somebody has come to see me early. Other women are coming to see me and they're 50 years old. Nobody's helped them. And I'm like, oh, you need everything. like, let's just jump right in. If you're a candidate, right, and we've all decided this is a good thing, you need it all. But assuming somebody started really early with me, we usually start with progesterone, then add an estrogen, and then evaluate for testosterone.
Mm-hmm. So just to kind of tail off with this, now we've looked obviously at HRT, and you mentioned testing being one of the precursors to see where things are at. And it can be a bit of a minefield when it comes to testing. And also when people go to the doctor, you'll ask for let's say for sake of testosterone, you will just get total. You ask for thyroid, you will just get T4. So what are the key markers that people need to ask for when it comes to looking at a blood panel? And if the budget allows, when should we look at further testing like Dutch, which might give you a bit more in depth?
When you're looking for thyroid, obviously, probably like yourself, I like the whole thyroid panel. So I'm looking at TSH and I'm looking for, so TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, and I'm looking at free T3 and free T4. If they'll allow it, if budget allows, then I would, and the symptoms apply, then I'll do the thyroid antibodies as well. So thyroid peroxidase antibody, thyroid globulin antibody. Those are the two Hashimoto's antibodies. Okay. And then if I need it based on maybe symptoms, history, family history, prior labs, I will do a reverse T3 as well. Not always, but sometimes. So that's thyroid. Then when it comes to testosterone, I like, very similar to men, I will do a total testosterone, a free testosterone, and a sex hormone binding globulin. I want to see the entire panel, even for women. And I think this gets forgotten about or pushed aside because they're like, testosterone's a men's hormone. It's not a woman's hormone. It's fine. I'm like, no, we have a lot of it too, just not as much as, you do. But, it's helpful to know. I want to know how much is it in total, and then what's free and available and what's getting bound up. Now, when it comes to a Dutch test, so the dried urine test for comprehensive hormones, that's a lot more comprehensive, hence the word and the name of the acronym, because now I'm looking at the testosterone, but I'm also looking at DHEAS, and I'm looking at how it moves downstream. When it breaks apart, it's called a metabolite. Where is it going? I'm looking at progesterone and how it breaks apart. I'm looking at estrogen and how it breaks apart. But I'm also looking at cortisol. So I'm looking at cortisol through the day, which is really nice when people go, I cannot sleep at night. I feel really wound up, or I'm so tired at 3 p.m. I don't know why I'm so tired. So I can get these cortisol points through the day. It also looks at melatonin, which is a huge one for sleep. And as people age, they don't produce as much melatonin out of their brain than when they were younger. And then lastly, that does an organic acid panel, which is where we look at markers that are indicative of nutrients. So there's a B12 marker, some B6 markers, glutathione markers, some inflammation markers, so that go with hormones. So it's a very comprehensive test. And I may not start with that, especially if she's in the throes of perimenopause and her cycle's all over the place. I may just be working to support her foundations, get her feeling better, reduce a lot of these symptoms. Depending, I may need the cortisol. I may want the organic acids. I may want to know these downstream effects of her estrogen and progesterone, and then I will add in a Dutch test. You do have to be careful, though, of testing estrogen and progesterone. If she has really irregular cycles, then it's not worth it, because it's the wild, wild west when she's all over the place, and estrogen and progesterone get caught up in that. So I usually will, if I'm going to do those two markers, I will wait till she's fully menopausal, postmenopausal, or I will do it early when she's still having regular cycles. Then I will look at estrogen, progesterone. The other markers, androgens, thyroid, etc., cortisol, you can do wherever she's at in this transition.
What about things like lipids, blood sugars? Does that tell you any information?
Right from the beginning. I want to know where she's at multiple points, because they are usually asymptomatic when they turn for the worse. And a lot of women turn for the worse and don't realize it. So I do lipids, of course, with triglycerides, apolipoprotein B, I'll do glucose and insulin. And then if I can, I will do the inflammation marker CRPHS, which is the C-reactive protein, the high sensitive one, to get a gauge on that. So I would love to have it early in her transition. If I've been seeing her for a while, I probably have it in her 30s. And then I would love to keep tabs on it yearly at her physical, because the minute it turns, she's not going to know it. She's not going to know that all of a sudden her particle count has gone up, her glucose is really high, and that puts her on the cardiovascular risk train, and I don't want her on that train.
Of course. This has been incredibly interesting. You've lived up to the hype I gave you in the first sentence of the show, for absolute sure. And there's stuff in that I have no idea about, and there's stuff that's a good recap from someone that's way more versed in this topic than I am. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Before I ask where people can find you, I have one closing question. And before I ask this to everybody, because I've been very, very gifted with the network that I have, been working in this industry for 15 years, to get some of the brightest names, including yourself, in the health and fitness space. And often when a new coach looks at this, they can often get very overwhelmed thinking that person's different to me, or they live a different life, and a lot of coaches are scared of being wrong. They're scared of asking the questions. And I think it's being open to that and understanding that everyone has gone through that and made a ton of mistakes and changed their mind and stuff is the reason why people get to where they are. So and this can be in health and fitness, this can be outside of health and fitness. What's one thing that springs to mind when I ask you, what have you changed your mind on?
What have I changed my mind on? Oh my goodness.
Deliberately vague for this exact reason.
I know. I can see that. I'm like, what have I changed my mind on recently? Or even just in general. Let's see. Actually, I used to, when I was in practice, I used to do, I was never afraid of hormones. Even with the study that came out, the Women's Health Initiative that said hormones cause cancer, I was like, I don't think single-handedly it can cause, like, we have them in our body. That would, anyway, I didn't buy into that at the time. However, what I used to do is I used to do progesterone and testosterone often together. And I couldn't figure out why it didn't always work, or they got worse, or again, like the blood sugar would go crazy, they'd gain weight and then now recently, with the testosterone estrogen ratio papers coming out, I'm like, oh, because I had it wrong. I had physiology wrong in the female body of where receptors were, how much testosterone we actually have relative to estrogen, even though estrogen's the bigger player, and what that does. I was actually driving them into a PCOS, a classical PCOS shape, as opposed to the reverse, stabilizing estrogen as best I could, and then adding in the androgenic aspect for everything else, like either libido or bones or mood, if it was going to support that. So that's probably the most recent thing that I was like, dang it.
I love that. I love the answer because one, it's very, very on brand with going into hormonal health, right? Which really just sums you up as the queen of hormones. But it also shows not only something you've changed your mind on, but something that you've openly admitted to making a mistake, as we all do, and learning from that, from finding mentors and people and experience and trialing things, and have come out the other side of it. So if people want to know more about you and what you do, where can people find Dr. Carrie Jones?
They can find me on my website, drcarriejones.com, and I spend a lot of time on Instagram at dr.carriejones. Those are probably the two. Oh, and YouTube. I'm at Dr. Carrie Jones on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel now, so yeah.
I will also throw in there, as anyone else, you do a lot of work with Metabolic Mental University, which is some great work that I have listened to. And on the Dutch YouTube channel, which I have also binge watched, so I'm just going to spread all the avenues of finding some information about yourself. But
MMU Dutch, Rupa Health. I do a lot of education. Now that I've put a lot of the years in, I do a lot of education.
And I tell you, I can at least speak for myself that I'm very grateful that you do. So thank you very much for your time. Absolutely love this.
Thank you.